When my grandfather died, he left me his cabin in the woods. I thought I was inheriting land. I didn't realize I was inheriting the rules that kept something from getting inside. When my grandfather died, I inherited the one thing everyone in the family avoided talking about, his cabin deep in the Black Forest. It sat alone at the end of an overgrown dirt road, surrounded by towering pines so dense they blocked the sun even in the middle of the day. As a child, I had spent one weekend there with him. I remembered the smell of wood smoke, the creaking floorboards, and the way Grandpa always locked the doors before sunset without ever explaining why. The lawyers said he left me the property because I was the only one who would understand. I had no idea what that meant. My plan was simple: spend a week at the cabin, clean it up, and decide whether to sell it. The moment I arrived, however, I felt something was wrong. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No birds, no insects, only the sound of the wind moving through the trees like distant whispers. Inside, the cabin looked exactly as I remembered. His old hunting rifle still hung above the fireplace. His boots stood beside the front door. On the kitchen table sat a single yellowed envelope with my name written in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was one sentence: read the rules before sunset. Follow them exactly if you want to live. Beneath the note was a second sheet titled, Rules for Staying at the Cabin. I laughed nervously, convinced this was one of Grandpa's strange jokes. But as the afternoon light began to fade and the shadows outside stretched deeper into the woods, I felt an unease I couldn't explain. Then I heard something moving between the trees. Slow footsteps, circling the cabin, and I had not yet read the first rule. I forced myself to sit at the kitchen table while the footsteps continued outside, crunching through dead leaves in a slow, deliberate circle around the cabin. The sound would pause beneath one window, then continue to the next, as if something was checking every possible way inside. My laughter faded as I unfolded the second sheet. At the top, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting, were 10 rules. The first line made my stomach tighten. 1. Lock every door before the sun disappears behind the trees. I glanced toward the windows. The last strip of orange light was already sinking into the forest. I rushed through the cabin, slamming and locking the front door, the back door, and the cellar hatch. By the time I finished, darkness had settled outside like a heavy curtain. Breathing hard, I returned to the table and read the next rules. 2. Close every curtain. 3. If you hear 3 knocks at the front door, do not answer. 4. If something calls your name from outside, stay silent. 5. If you see me standing in the yard after midnight, do not let me in. I stared at the final sentence until the letters blurred. See me standing in the yard. My grandfather had been buried 3 days earlier. A sudden thud came from the roof. Then another. Then 3 slow, deliberate knocks echoed through the front door. I froze. Knock, knock, knock. A familiar voice drifted from the porch, weak and trembling. Chris, it's Grandpa. I forgot something inside. Every hair on my arms stood up. Because my grandfather was dead. And someone, or something, was wearing his voice. My body locked in place. Every instinct told me to run to the door, to throw it open and prove there was a rational explanation. Maybe grief was distorting what I heard. Maybe some cruel relative thought this was a joke. Then I looked back at the rules. If something calls your name from outside, stay silent. The voice came again, softer this time. Chris, please. It's cold out here. It sounded exactly like him. The same gravelly tone, the same slight tremble he'd developed in his final years. My chest tightened so hard it hurt. I pressed both hands over my mouth. For nearly a minute, there was only silence. Then the voice changed. The warmth vanished. The words stretched unnaturally, as if spoken through a throat that had never learned how human speech was supposed to sound. Chris. A fingernail, or something like one, scraped slowly across the front door. The sound moved to the living room window, then to the kitchen. Whatever was outside was circling again. I forced myself to keep reading. 6. If the generator shuts off, restore power within 5 minutes. 7. Do not look into the woods between 2:13 a.m. and 2:20 a.m. 8. Keep the hunting rifle loaded, but use it only if it gets inside. 9. The thing outside cannot cross a locked door unless invited. 10. Survive until sunrise. A sudden roar shook the cabin as the generator outside sputtered and died. The lights went out. The refrigerator fell silent. The digital clock on the stove blinked once, then went black. In the darkness, something struck the front door so hard the walls shuddered. A second blow followed immediately. Then a third. Wood splintered near the frame. I grabbed Grandpa's flashlight and turned it on with trembling hands. 4 minutes and 58 seconds remained, and whatever was outside had stopped pretending to be my grandfather. I snatched Grandpa's flashlight from the table and the hunting rifle from above the fireplace. The metal felt cold and heavier than I remembered. Outside, the thing slammed against the front door again, rattling the lock so violently that dust drifted from the ceiling. The note had said 5 minutes. I checked my phone. 2:07 a.m. The generator sat in a small shed 20 yards behind the cabin. To reach it, I would have to step into the darkness. Another crash hit the wall beside the kitchen window. Glass trembled in its frame. I swung the flashlight beam toward the curtains. A tall silhouette moved across the fabric, far too thin, with arms that seemed to bend in the wrong places. "Chris," it whispered from directly outside the window. "You're almost out of time." It knew the rules. I chambered around, unlocked the back door, and stepped onto the porch. The cold struck me immediately. The forest was silent except for the distant ticking of the generator as it cooled. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating wet grass and drifting fog. The shed door stood open. I didn't remember leaving it that way. I hurried forward, boots crunching on gravel. Halfway there, I heard footsteps pacing parallel to me in the trees. Not behind me, beside me, keeping perfect pace. I reached the shed and swept the light inside. The generator's fuel line had been torn clean off, and nailed to the wall above it was a fresh sheet of paper in my grandfather's handwriting. Only 3 words were written across it. It learned the rules. My throat tightened as I stared at the note. It learned the rules. For a second, I forgot to breathe. The footsteps in the trees stopped. The silence that followed was worse than any sound. It felt as if the entire forest were holding its breath, waiting to see what I would do next. I forced myself to focus on the generator. Grandpa had always kept tools organized with military precision. A spare fuel line hung on the back wall beside a can of gasoline and a rusted toolbox. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the wrench twice. From somewhere beyond the shed, the creature spoke again in my grandfather's voice. "You were always my favorite, Chris." I clenched my teeth and kept working. The voice changed. Now it sounded like my mother. "Please come back inside." Then my girlfriend. "Chris, I'm scared." The words were perfect. The emotions were perfect. But the timing was wrong. The thing was trying every voice it knew. I tightened the final clamp and yanked the starter cord. Nothing. A heavy thud struck the outside wall of the shed. Dust fell from the rafters. I pulled again. Still nothing. Another impact, harder this time, bowed the thin metal door inward. A long black claw slid through the gap at the top. I looked at my phone. 2:11 a.m. 2 minutes left. I primed the engine, whispered a prayer, and pulled with all my strength. The generator roared to life. At that exact moment, the creature shrieked. Not in anger, in pain. The sound was so inhuman that my knees nearly gave out. Floodlights around the cabin flickered back on, illuminating the clearing. For the first time, I saw it clearly. It stood at the edge of the trees, nearly 8 feet tall, impossibly thin, its skin stretched tight over something that looked more like roots than bones. And it was wearing my grandfather's face. The floodlights turned the clearing into a pale circle of safety, and the creature recoiled at the edge of the trees like an animal caught in a trap. For one horrifying second, I saw every detail. My grandfather's face hung over its skull like a mask pulled too tightly over something that had no business wearing human skin. The eyes were wrong, black and glossy, reflecting the light like those of a deer on a dark road. Its mouth stretched into a smile far wider than any human jaw could manage. Beneath the face, the body was all angles and twisted limbs, as if branches and tendons had grown together into a mockery of a man. Then it spoke. "Good," it said in Grandpa's voice. "Now you understand why he stayed." The creature stepped backward into the shadows, disappearing between the trees with a rustle of leaves. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I sprinted to the cabin, slammed the back door, and locked it. My chest burned. My hands were numb from fear and cold. The kitchen clock blinked back to life. 2:12 a.m. I had 1 minute before Rule 7 began. Do not look into the woods between 2:13 a.m. and 2:20 a.m. I closed every curtain again and pushed the sofa against the front door. Then I sat at the kitchen table with the rifle across my lap and the flashlight beside me. The clock changed. 2:13 a.m. At first, nothing happened. Then the whispering started. Hundreds of voices drifted through the walls, overlapping in a language I couldn't understand. Some sounded human, others sounded like animals trying to imitate speech. The windows began to glow faintly green through the edges of the curtains. A shadow moved behind the fabric. Then another, and another. There weren't just one of them. There were dozens. Something tapped gently on the glass next to my head. 3 slow taps. A pause. Then my grandfather's voice spoke from directly outside the kitchen window. "You should have read the back of the page." My blood ran cold, because I had never turned the rules over. My hands shook as I grabbed the rules and flipped the page over. There was only one sentence written on the back, in hurried handwriting that cut so deeply into the paper it nearly tore through. "If you survive the first night, burn this cabin before you leave." A loud crack exploded from the living room. I swung the flashlight toward the sound. One of the window panes had fractured from corner to corner. Thin black fingers pressed against the glass from outside, tracing along the crack as if testing how much force it would take to break through. The whispering around the cabin grew louder. Not dozens of voices, hundreds. Some laughed, some cried, some repeated my name over and over until it became a chant. "Chris, Chris, Chris." I checked the stove clock. 2:16 a.m. 4 minutes to go. Then I heard a sound from below my feet. A knock, from the cellar. I stared at the floorboards, my pulse hammering in my ears. Grandpa had never mentioned the cellar in the rules. Another knock came from beneath the kitchen. Then a familiar voice drifted upward through the wood. My grandfather, the real one. His voice was weak, strained, and terrified. "Chris," he whispered, "don't open it." The creatures outside began screaming in rage. The cabin shook so violently that dishes crashed from the shelves. The cracked living room window shattered inward, spraying glass across the floor. A long arm reached through the broken frame, clawing blindly for the latch. I raised the rifle. For the first time, one of them was inside. I pulled the trigger. The rifle erupted with a deafening blast that lit the room in white-orange fire. The creature's arm exploded backward through the shattered window, spraying black fluid across the curtains and floorboards. The screaming outside became unbearable. Not one voice, hundreds. The sound shook the dishes in the cabinets and rattled the nails in the walls. For a moment, the reaching stopped. I worked the bolt with trembling hands and chambered another round. The digital clock on the stove glowed through the chaos. 2:18 a.m. 2 minutes. Then the cellar door burst open. The heavy wooden hatch slammed against the kitchen wall with enough force to split the frame. Cold air poured upward from the darkness below. I aimed the rifle at the opening. Slow footsteps climbed the stairs. One at a time. Deliberate. A figure emerged into the kitchen light. My grandfather. Not the twisted imitation outside. The real man, exactly as I remembered him. Flannel shirt, hunting jacket, tired eyes filled with urgency. He looked at me and spoke in a voice I had trusted my entire life. "Listen carefully," he said. "The thing outside is only the first lock." The whispering beyond the walls went silent. Grandpa glanced toward the window, fear crossing his face. I trapped something older beneath this cabin. Every night, the creature in the woods tests the doors. It was never trying to get in. My grip tightened on the rifle. Then what does it want? Grandpa's expression darkened. To make you open the cellar. A massive impact struck the front door, splintering the wood. Another hit followed. The hinges began to tear loose. Grandpa stepped backward toward the cellar stairs. When the clock reaches 2:20, the protection ends. If you trust me, come downstairs. I looked from him to the front door as it buckled inward under another tremendous blow. The stove clock changed. 2:19 a.m. And for the first time that night, I had no idea which monster was telling the truth. The front door exploded inward. The sofa slid across the floor as a towering shape forced itself into the cabin. Splintered wood scattered across the kitchen. The creature from the woods unfolded to its full height beneath the ceiling, its limbs bending like branches in a storm. But it did not lunge at me. It stared at my grandfather. For the first time, I saw fear in those black, glassy eyes. "Don't listen to him," the creature hissed, dropping the imitation and speaking in its own voice, a deep, layered sound like several people speaking at once. "He is the reason I have guarded this place." My grandfather stepped back down the cellar stairs. "Chris," he said, his voice urgent. Now, the stove clock changed. 2:20 a.m. The green glow outside vanished. The whispering stopped. The creatures beyond the walls fell silent. Something beneath the floor roared. The entire cabin shuddered. The creature from the woods turned to me and held out one clawed hand. "He trapped it here generations ago," it said. "Every eldest son in our family has stayed to keep the seal intact. I was never hunting your grandfather. I was keeping watch." Another violent tremor split the floorboards around the cellar entrance. Black smoke poured from below. My grandfather's face hardened into something I had never seen before. "If you come down here," he said, "you take my place." The truth hit me like ice water. Grandpa had not left me a cabin. He had left me a prison. And he expected me to become its next warden. The creature by the broken front door lowered its hand. "Or," it said, "burn the cabin and end this tonight." The floor beneath the cellar stairs collapsed, revealing a vast darkness below. Two glowing eyes opened in the abyss, larger than any living thing should possess. The walls began to split apart. I had seconds to choose. Follow my grandfather into the darkness, or destroy the cabin and release whatever had been trapped beneath it for generations. The cabin groaned like it was alive. Wood split along the ceiling beams. The lights flickered wildly. Dust rained down as the foundation beneath us started to give way. From the cellar, those massive glowing eyes blinked once. Slow, patient, certain, and then a voice rose up from the dark, so deep it felt less like sound and more like pressure inside my skull. Finally, my grandfather took one step back toward me, his hand still extended. "Chris, if it rises, it doesn't just kill us. It replaces us. It wears us. It spreads." The creature at the broken door laughed, a harsh, broken sound. "You still don't understand," it said. "It already has been spreading. The forest, the voices, the faces, that was only the edge of it." The floor cracked again. The cellar stairs snapped in half and fell into the void below. The eyes in the darkness rose closer, and I saw movement behind them. Shapes, many of them, layered, waiting. My grip on the rifle slipped slightly. For the first time, I realized the rules were never meant to protect me from something outside. They were meant to keep something contained inside the cabin. A final rule flashed through my mind. Burn it. But burning it meant collapsing everything. Killing my grandfather. Killing whatever he had become. Maybe even letting something worse escape. The creature stepped fully into the light now, standing between me and the door. I can help you end it, it said quietly. But you have to choose who you believe. The cabin tilted. A beam above me snapped. And I understood the real horror. There was no safe choice left. Only the choice of what kind of ending I would live with. The ceiling finally gave way. A section of roof collapsed into the living room with a thunderous crash, sending splinters and dust everywhere. Cold night air poured in through the broken structure, mixing with the choking darkness rising from the cellar. The two glowing eyes below pulsed brighter, like something waking up fully for the first time. My grandfather staggered as the floor beneath him cracked again. He looked at me, not as a man giving instructions anymore, but as someone running out of time. Chris, he said, softer now. I didn't have a choice. It would have escaped decades ago. The creature at the door took a slow step forward. No, it corrected. You chose to keep it hungry. The word hungry made the cabin shake harder. The cellar darkness surged upward like smoke pulled by wind. The wooden floorboards around the hole blackened instantly, as if being erased. I backed up instinctively until my back hit the kitchen counter. My hand brushed something. The matchbox. Old. Wooden. Grandpa always kept it above the stove. The creature's head snapped toward it. A reaction. Fear. Real fear. Don't. It said sharply. If you ignite that place without sealing it. The rest of the sentence was drowned out by a roar from below. The eyes rose to just beneath the broken floor. Now I could see what was attached to them. Not a body. A mass of shifting shapes trying to become one. My grandfather reached out again. This is the last second, he said. If you come with me now, I can still. But he didn't finish. Because the creature grabbed him. Not violently. Precisely. Its claws wrapped around his arm and stopped him from stepping forward. He's already part of it, it said. My grandfather didn't resist. He just looked at me. And nodded once. Like a goodbye. The cabin was collapsing. The matchbox was in my hand. And for the first time all night, everything went quiet again. Waiting for my decision. The silence felt wrong. Not peaceful. Just paused, like the entire cabin was holding still to watch what I would do next. The matchbox sat in my palm. One small strike. That was all it would take. Below the broken floor, the thing in the cellar pressed closer. The darkness was no longer just darkness. It had texture now, like something breathing through the wood. The glowing eyes didn't blink anymore. They simply stared, waiting. My grandfather's voice came again. Quieter. Burn it, and don't hesitate. The creature at the door tightened its grip on him. Listen to him carefully, it said. Because this is the first honest thing he's said all night. That hit harder than it should have. My throat went dry. Why? I asked, my voice barely holding together. Why me? My grandfather looked tired. Not defeated. Just exhausted in a way that went far beyond one night. Because it knows your name now, he said. And once it knows your name long enough, it stops needing the door. The cabin creaked violently. A beam snapped above me and crashed into the kitchen counter, inches from my arm. The matchbox slipped slightly in my fingers. And then, something new happened. From outside, not the creature, not the cellar, a voice I hadn't heard all night. Birds, morning birds, faint, distant, real. Dawn was coming. The creature at the door froze. For the first time, it looked uncertain. No, it whispered. The glowing eyes in the cellar flickered. Just slightly. The darkness reacted like it was being pushed down. Weakening. My grandfather's expression changed instantly. Now, he said urgently. Chris, now. The creature hissed, pulling him backward toward the broken doorway. If you burn it now, It snarled, "You don't just end me, you break the seal completely at sunrise." The matchbox was still in my hand. One strike, one decision, and the first light of morning was beginning to touch the edge of the forest outside. I struck the match. For a fraction of a second, the tiny flame looked absurdly small compared to the chaos around me. A single spark against an ancient darkness. Then I threw it. The match landed on the overturned kerosene lantern lying beside the fireplace. Glass shattered. Fuel spread across the floor and ignited in a violent rush. Flames raced along the dry wooden boards. The creature at the door shrieked and released my grandfather. "Run!" Both of them screamed at the same time. I didn't hesitate. I dove through the broken front doorway just as the kitchen windows burst outward behind me. Heat slammed into my back. I hit the ground hard and rolled across the frozen grass. The forest erupted with sound. Every voice I had heard that night screamed at once, human, animal, and things that belonged to neither. I scrambled to my feet and stumbled toward the dirt road. Behind me, the cabin became an inferno. Through the flames, I saw my grandfather standing in the doorway one last time. He looked younger somehow, straighter, free of the burden he had carried for decades. He raised his hand, and smiled. Then the floor collapsed. A column of black smoke shot into the sky as something enormous roared from beneath the earth. The sound lasted only a few seconds. Then the first rays of sunlight broke over the trees. The scream stopped instantly. The forest fell silent, not the unnatural silence of the previous night. A real silence. Peaceful. Birds began to sing. I stood there shaking, watching the cabin burn to its foundation. When the flames finally died hours later, investigators found nothing beneath the ruins except stone, ash, and a rusted iron door fused permanently shut. My grandfather's body was never recovered. Neither was the creature from the woods. I never rebuilt the cabin. I sold the land to the government under one condition: no one was ever allowed to dig there. For months, I convinced myself it was over. Then, on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, a plain envelope appeared in my mailbox. No stamp, no return address, only my name written in the same shaky handwriting I had recognized that first night. Inside was a single sentence: "You survived the first night. There are other cabins." I spent the next 3 days trying to convince myself the letter was a prank. I showed it to no one. What was I supposed to say? That my dead grandfather had written to me from beyond the grave. That an ancient thing beneath his cabin had nearly broken free, and another creature had been guarding the woods for generations. No one would believe me. Part of me didn't want to believe it either. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes opening beneath the floor. And every time I touched the letter, the paper felt as old and brittle as the rules I had found on the kitchen table. On the 4th day, I unfolded the note again. There was more writing on the back that I hadn't noticed before. A list of names, 12 of them, each followed by a location: cabins, farmhouses, hunting lodges, and abandoned ranger stations scattered across Germany, Austria, Romania, Canada, and the United States. At the bottom, one final message was written in my grandfather's hand. Our family was never guarding just one door. My blood ran cold. The cabin in the woods had only been one lock among many. And now that my grandfather was gone, someone had to decide whether the others were still holding. I should have burned the letter. I should have walked away. Instead, I packed the rifle, the flashlight, and the original rules into a duffel bag. The first location on the list was an abandoned ranger station high in the Bavarian Alps. According to the note, the current keeper had stopped responding 2 weeks earlier. At dawn the next morning, I started the engine of my car and drove toward the mountains. I told myself I was looking for answers. But deep down, I knew the truth. The night at my grandfather's cabin was not the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The road into the Bavarian Alps narrowed until it became little more than a strip of cracked asphalt clinging to the mountainside. Pine forests swallowed the sunlight, and snow still lingered in the shadows despite the late spring thaw. By the time I reached the abandoned ranger station, the sky was turning gray. It stood alone above a frozen lake, its radio tower bent and rusted, its windows boarded from the inside. A weathered sign near the entrance had been carved with a symbol I recognized immediately. The same symbol that had been burned into the iron door beneath my grandfather's cabin. My stomach tightened. A fresh set of tire tracks ended in front of the building. Someone else had arrived before me. Inside, the air smelled of old wood, kerosene, and something metallic. On the central desk lay another envelope. This one was addressed simply to the next keeper. I opened it with shaking hands. The first line read, "If you are reading this, I did not survive the 7th night." Footsteps creaked above me. Slow, heavy, deliberate. I looked up toward the ceiling. A voice called down from the 2nd floor. My own voice. "Chris," it whispered, "you're too late." I turned the page. At the top was a new title written in hurried ink. Rules for the Mountain Station. And beneath it, in my grandfather's handwriting, were the words I had been dreading since the night the cabin burned. These rules are much harder. I stared at the first rule, my flashlight trembling in my hand. 1. Never answer your own voice. The floor above me creaked again. "Chris," my voice called from the darkness overhead, perfectly mimicking the strain and fear I heard in myself every morning since the cabin burned. "Please, help me." I kept reading. 2. If the lake begins to glow, do not go outside. 3. If the radio turns on by itself, listen carefully. It may be your only warning. 4. At midnight, lock the observation tower hatch. 5. If you hear footsteps on the roof, there is already one inside. A sudden burst of static erupted from the old radio on the desk. I nearly dropped the flashlight. The speaker crackled, then a familiar voice came through. My grandfather, older, tired, recorded years ago. "Chris, if you made it here, then the line is failing faster than I feared." The voice paused, as if he were gathering strength. The creature at my cabin was a guardian, not a prisoner. There are 13 doors in the world, each holding back a different fragment of the same thing. If 2 doors fail at once, the radio dissolved into violent static. A deep groan echoed from outside. I rushed to the nearest window and peeled back the board just enough to look. The frozen lake below the station was glowing. A pale green light spread beneath the ice-like veins. Rule 2 flashed in my mind. Do not go outside. The radio hissed back to life. Grandpa's voice returned for one final sentence. Whatever you do, don't let the fragments find each other. Then the lights in the station went out. Above me, my voice spoke again. Only this time, it was laughing. I should have burned the second letter. Instead, I drove to the ranger station because I needed one answer. Had my grandfather sacrificed his life to save the world, or had he simply passed a curse to me? The moment I stepped inside, I knew the truth. This place wasn't the start of a new story. It was the final chapter of the old one. The envelope on the desk contained only 5 rules, but tucked behind them was a photograph. My grandfather stood beside 12 other men and women in front of cabins, monasteries, lighthouses, and remote stations from around the world. On the back he had written, "Tonight decides whether any of this still matters." The radio crackled to life. "Chris," my grandfather's recorded voice said, "if you reached the mountain station, then the thing beneath my cabin survived in some form. This is the oldest and strongest lock. If it fails, the others become meaningless." A heavy thud shook the roof. My own voice laughed above me. And for the first time, I understood. There were never meant to be 13 stories. Only one final battle. The new rules were simple. At midnight, lock the observation tower. At 2:13 a.m., Do not look at the lake. If the radio says to run, run. And if the voice upstairs starts begging, do not answer. By 1:47 a.m., the frozen lake beneath the station glowed like a living heart. By 2:10 a.m., footsteps covered the roof. By 2:13 a.m., the entire building began to vibrate. My voice screamed from upstairs. Chris, it's under the ice. The boards over the windows bulged inward. The radio exploded with static. Then my grandfather's voice cut through the noise with a single command. Go to the tower, now. I climbed the tower ladder as the station tore itself apart beneath me. The creature from the woods stood outside in the snow, watching silently. It did not attack. It bowed its head. The ice on the lake shattered. A column of black smoke rose into the sky, twisting into shapes that looked like faces. The tower beacon activated automatically, flooding the valley with brilliant white light. The smoke wreathed, screamed, and began to burn. For several endless minutes, the mountain echoed with a sound older than language. Then the sun rose over the peaks. The black mass disintegrated. The glowing lake went dark. And the silence that followed felt like the world exhaling. When I climbed down, the ranger station was intact again. The envelope on the desk had changed. Inside was my grandfather's final message. If you are reading this, then it is over. The doors were never prisons. They were alarms. Our family's duty was simply to make sure humanity had enough warning to survive. You were the last keeper because you were the first one strong enough to end it. Live your life, Chris. Do not return to the woods. Folded inside the letter was one old photograph of me and Grandpa standing in front of the original cabin when I was 8 years old. On the back he had written, I always knew you would finish what I started. I cried for the first time since his funeral. Then I walked away. And this time, I never looked back.